This really happened to me, and to this day I still can't believe the lengths someone I loved would go to just to betray me. I'll never forget the sound of her voice when she told me, calm, cold, almost smug, that the house deed was no longer mine. She had tricked me into signing over the very property I had worked my entire life to build, turning what should have been my daughter's blessing into my greatest humiliation. And the worst part, she was smiling when she said it, as if robbing her own mother was nothing but a clever joke. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. I grew up believing that when you raised a child with love, that love would come back to you one day. My own parents didn't have much. My father was a factory worker in Toledo, Ohio, and my mother cleaned houses, but they gave me everything they could when I finally built a life of my own in Cleveland, scraping and saving to buy my first small house on East 128th Street. I promised myself I'd give my daughter Jennifer a better start than I ever had. Jennifer was born when I was 22. Her father left before she could walk, so it was always just the two of us. That girl was my entire world. I worked double shifts at the Cleveland Clinic as a nurse's aide, and every time my back screamed from lifting patients or my feet throbbed from standing too long, I'd look at her photo in my locker and remind myself why I kept going. When she was little, I gave her everything I could afford, dance lessons, braces a used car at 16. But I also gave her what I thought was priceless, the stability I never had. She went to good schools, had food on the table every night, and never once had to worry about the lights being shut off. Maybe that's where I went wrong, because as she grew, I began to notice she had a taste for things. I couldn't provide brand names, flashy jewelry, the kind of lifestyle her wealthier classmates showed off. She wasn't cruel about it, but I could feel her quiet resentment whenever I said no. Still, I thought it was just a phase. Kids grow out of it. Right? I was wrong. By the time Jennifer turned 30, she'd gone through 2 marriages and was living in Las Vegas, chasing some kind of glamorous life. I couldn't understand. She barely called unless she needed money, and when she did, her tone was so sweet it could rot teeth. I would always give in, even when I couldn't really afford it, because that's what mothers do, right? Then came the house. In 2015, after 40 years of work, I had finally paid off my mortgage. That little 3-bedroom in Cleveland was mine free and clear. I had plans to leave it to Jennifer when I passed something solid she could always come back to. But Jennifer had other plans. She showed up one spring afternoon, all dolled up in a designer blouse, her hair in perfect curls. She hugged me like she hadn't in years, spinning me around in the kitchen. "Mom, I've missed you so much," she said, eyes shining. We sat at the dining table, the same table I'd bought from a Goodwill back in the 80s, and she pulled out a folder. "I've been thinking a lot about the future." She said, "I want to make sure everything is in order for when you're older." Her words made me uncomfortable, but I tried to smile. She told me she had a friend, a lawyer, who could help set up the paperwork so the house would automatically go to her when I passed. "It's just easier, Mom," she said, her voice syrupy. "No probate court, no red tape. It's the smart thing to do. I wanted to believe her. She was my daughter. Why would she ever trick me?" So I signed, and that's when the nightmare began. Because a few months later, when I got behind on some medical bills and decided to take out a small home equity loan, the bank manager looked at me strangely and said, "Mom, sorry, but you're not the owner of this property anymore." My stomach dropped. The deed was now in Jennifer's name. She hadn't set it up to transfer after my death. She had taken it immediately. I called her panicked, and when she finally answered, I could hear the laughter in her voice. "Oh, Mom," she said, almost mocking. "You're fine. The house is safe with me, safe with her. My entire life's work stolen with the stroke of a pen." That was the moment the betrayal cut deep enough to bleed rage into my veins, and it was only the beginning, because soon after Jennifer made it clear She had no intention of keeping me in that house for much longer. I wish I could say I stayed calm when Jennifer revealed what she had done, but the truth is, I felt like my whole world tilted sideways. The ground didn't feel steady beneath my feet anymore. The house wasn't just a piece of property, it was the evidence of every sacrifice I'd ever made. And now, with a single sly move, my own daughter had stripped it away. The very next week, she showed up unannounced. I was in the kitchen, frying eggs, when I heard her heels clacking down the hallway. She didn't even knock. She pushed the door open and breezed in, like she owned the place. Because technically, she did. "Mom," she said, dropping her oversized purse on the couch. "I've been thinking, this house is too big for you to maintain. Don't you think it's time you considered something smaller?" I stared at her, spatula in hand, my heart pounding. "This is my home. Jennifer, I've lived here for 40 years. Don't start with this." She gave me a tight smile, the kind she wore when she thought she was being clever. I'm just saying, the neighborhood isn't what it used to be. And well, I have opportunities. If I sold this house, I could invest. We'd both benefit. There it was, not even subtle. She wanted to sell. I slammed the spatula down so hard, the pan rattled over my dead body. Her expression didn't waver. In fact, it sharpened. "Well, Mom, that's kind of the point. Legally, this house is mine now. I can do whatever I want with it." That was the moment I realized Jennifer wasn't the girl I raised anymore. She had become something else, something cold, greedy, and dangerous. For days, I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards made me wonder how long before she forced me out, left me with nothing but memories and a suitcase. I confided in my neighbor, Mrs. Davis, a sharp old widow who'd lived across the street since I moved in. She shook her head and muttered, "You need to be careful. Family will cut you deeper than strangers ever could," but I wasn't ready to fight. Not yet, not until Jennifer pushed me further. And she did. A month later, I received a letter in the mail. Jennifer had initiated the process to put the house on the market. My name wasn't on the paperwork at all, just hers. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where she'd tricked me into signing the deed, and felt my blood boil. I called her voice, shaking. "How could you do this to me? This is my home." Her reply was sharp and smug. "Correction, it's my home. You're just living in it until I say otherwise." Something inside me snapped. That was the turning point. The humiliation was unbearable. Yes, but beneath it grew a determination. I didn't know I had Jennifer thought she had all the power, that her legal trick meant she had won. But she had underestimated me. I wasn't some naive old woman she could steamroll. I started digging. First, I called the county records office downtown. I asked about the deed transfer, the paperwork Jennifer had filed. The woman on the phone was polite but firm. The documents were legitimate. I had signed them willingly. My signature was right there in black ink. But as I pressed her for details, I learned something crucial. The transfer hadn't been a simple beneficiary deed. Like Jennifer had claimed, it was an immediate transfer of ownership. And the lawyer who had notarized it, he was no stranger to Jennifer. He was her friend from Las Vegas. That discovery lit a fire in me. If she was willing to orchestrate this, what else had she lied about? I went through every memory of that day. She handed me the papers. The fancy blouse, the sudden affection, the way she glossed over the details. My stomach turned. She had staged it, manipulated me like I was some clueless mark in one of her Vegas schemes. And the more I thought about it, the more the past began to click into place. The constant requests for money, the failed marriages, the expensive tastes. Jennifer had been grooming me for this. She knew I would cave, that I trusted her too much to question her motives. But now I knew the truth, and I wasn't about to let her get away with it. The first step was to get advice. I booked a consultation with a property attorney downtown in a modest office on Euclid Avenue. He was an older man with kind eyes, but a blunt way of speaking. After I explained the situation, he leaned back, steepled his fingers, and said, "I'm sorry to tell you this, Mom, But unless you can prove fraud, your daughter has every legal right to that house. Fraud. The word stuck in my head. I left his office with my heart pounding, the Cleveland air biting cold as I walked to my car. Fraud, that meant there was still a chance. If I could prove Jennifer had deceived me, if I could catch her in her lies, I could take back what was mine. That night, lying awake in my bed, I stared at the cracked ceiling and swore to myself I would find proof, I would expose her. I would make sure the world saw her for what she was. She thought she had beaten me. But this was war now, and Jennifer had no idea what her naive old mom was about to unleash. The war began quietly, like the hush before a storm. I didn't tell Jennifer a thing. I didn't argue, didn't protest. I let her think I was defeated, that I was slowly accepting the situation. It was easier to fight back if she thought she'd already won. I started with the paperwork. I went back down to the Cuyahoga County Recorder's office, this time in person. The building smelled faintly of dust and coffee, the kind of place where secrets lingered in old file cabinets. I requested every document with my name and Jennifer's on it for the last 5 years. The clerk gave me a stack thick enough to make my hands tremble as I carried it back to the car. At home, I laid everything out on the dining table, the same table where Jennifer had tricked me, and began to study. My hands shook as I traced each line, each signature, trying to see if anything stood out. And then I found it. My signature on the deed transfer looked different, too smooth, too perfect. I remembered the day I signed. My hand had been unsteady, my arthritis acting up, but here the signature looked flawless. Almost printed, I snapped photos and tucked the documents back into their folder. Next, I called a handwriting expert. I found one in Akron, a woman named Melissa, who had testified in several fraud cases. I drove the 40 minutes to her office, with my stomach twisting into knots. Melissa examined the deed under a magnifying glass, compared it with old checks and letters I brought along. After half an hour, she looked up and said the words I'd been praying to hear. "This isn't a natural signature. Someone either traced yours or forged it digitally." My heart nearly leapt out of my chest. Proof. Real proof. But proof wasn't enough. Not yet. I needed to dig deeper into Jennifer's world. I started following her social media. Jennifer loved to brag online. She posted pictures in casinos, at fancy restaurants, showing off diamond bracelets and champagne glasses. Each post made my blood boil. She was living a life of luxury while plotting to leave me homeless. But one photo caught my attention. It was Jennifer at a rooftop bar in Las Vegas, her arm around a slick-looking man in a suit. The caption read, "My lifesaver, the best lawyer a girl could ask for." I zoomed in on his face. The same lawyer who had notarized the deed transfer, that was the missing puzzle piece. She hadn't just lied. She had orchestrated the entire scheme with help from this sockled lifesaver. I printed the photo, slid it into the folder with the forged documents, and felt my determination sharpen into something unbreakable. But Jennifer wasn't done playing her games. 2 weeks later, she showed up again, this time with a real estate agent in tow. I was in the front yard, pruning roses, when a shiny black Lexus pulled into the driveway. Jennifer stepped out in designer heels, sunglasses perched on her head. Behind her, a young man in a tailored suit carried a clipboard. "Mom," she called, her voice fake cheerful. "This is Brian. Hez going to help us list the house." I froze, pruning shears in hand. "List? What do you mean, list?" Jennifer rolled her eyes like I was being dramatic. "Sell, Mom. We've talked about this. It's time to move on." The agent gave me a polite nod, clearly uncomfortable. "Mom, don't worry, we'll find you a great buyer. Homes in this area are very desirable." I felt heat rise in my chest. "This is my home. You can't just—" Jennifer cut me off with a sharp smile. "Correction, it's my home, and I can do whatever I want." She turned to the agent, ignoring me. "Let's start with photos of the living room." I stood frozen, rage simmering so hot. My hands trembled. I wanted to scream, to throw her out. But instead, I forced myself to breathe. Let her play her hand. Let her show the world just how greedy she really was. Brian took a few tentative photos before Jennifer ushered him inside. I followed them silent, watching as they walked through the rooms I had lived in for 4 decades. Jennifer made comments. "We'll paint this wall, remove that ugly cabinet, like my life. Here was already erased." When they left, I collapsed into my armchair shaking. I realized then that if I didn't act fast, I'd be on the street within months. That night I pulled out the folder again. I studied the photo of Jennifer with her lawyer. The experts report the forged signature. I knew it was time to move. The next morning I returned to the attorney on Euclid Avenue. When I showed him the new evidence, his eyes widened. "This changes things," he said. "If the signature was forged and the notary was involved, we're talking about criminal fraud. You could file charges. This isn't just about getting your house back anymore. It's about exposing them." I felt a rush of grim satisfaction. For the first time in months, I wasn't just a victim. I had the power to fight back. But there was one thing I hadn't counted on. Jennifer wasn't about to let me quietly build a case against her. She was watching me just as closely as I was watching her. One evening as I sat in my car outside the attorney's office, my phone buzzed. A text from Jennifer lit up the screen. "Careful, Mom. You don't want to make this ugly." My blood ran cold. She knew somehow she knew, and that meant the battle was about to escalate into something far more dangerous. Jennifer's text haunted me all night. "Careful, Mom. You don't want to make this ugly. Ugly." It was already ugly. She'd stolen my home, humiliated me, and paraded around as though she were some kind of master manipulator. But that message, it was a warning and maybe even a threat. For the first time, I wondered just how far my own daughter would go to protect her scam. I started double-locking my doors at night. I kept the curtains drawn too paranoid to let shadows move across my living room. Every knock at the door made me jump. Jennifer had turned me into a prisoner in my own house. But fear wasn't stronger than rage. I met again with my attorney and told him about the text. He frowned, tapped his pen against his desk, and said, "Keep every message, record every call if you can. This isn't just fraud anymore. This could become harassment or intimidation." So I did. I bought a small notebook from the CVS down the street and wrote down every interaction with Jennifer, every strange phone call, every sighting of her car near the house. If she wanted to play this game, I would document every move until her mask slipped completely. Then came the first escalation. I was coming home from the grocery store carrying 2 paper bags of food when I noticed something off. My front door was ajar. My heart pounded as I carefully set down the bags on the porch and stepped inside. The house was silent. Too silent. I moved from room to room, terrified, until I reached the bedroom. My dresser drawers had been opened, clothes tossed around. A few jewelry boxes lay empty on the floor. Someone had been inside. I called the police immediately. When the officers arrived, they did a quick sweep and confirmed what I already knew. There'd been a break-in, but there was no sign of forced entry. Whoever had been inside used a key, and the only other person with a key was Jennifer. When I told the officer, he exchanged a look with his partner. "Mom, do you want to press charges?" I hesitated. Pressing charges meant declaring open war, but my hands clenched into fists as I looked at the mess she'd left behind. "Yes," I said firmly. "I want to press charges." The report was filed, but I knew Jennifer wouldn't go down that easily. Sure enough, the very next day she called me. Her voice was dripping with venom. "So you called the cops on me, Mom. Really, do you want me arrested? Because if I go down, you're coming with me with you." I snapped. "You stole my house." "Jennifer," she laughed bitterly. "You signed it over. Nobody forced you. Don't forget that." My hands shook as I held the phone. "You tricked me, and now you're breaking into my home." Her voice dropped low and chilling. "It's my home. You're just squatting in it. Don't push me." And then she hung up. For a long time, I sat frozen on the couch, staring at the silent phone in my hand. My own daughter had become a stranger, no worse than a stranger. She had become my enemy, but enemies can be defeated. The attorney advised me to start building not just a legal case, but a narrative, a story that showed Jennifer's pattern of manipulation and deceit. Judges don't just care about the paperwork, he explained. They care about the character of the people involved. If she's proven untrustworthy in other areas, it will support your case. So I began digging into Jennifer's past. I called her ex-husbands, both of them. The first, Daniel, lived in Arizona now. When I told him who I was, there was a long pause on the line before he sighed. She drained me dry, he said bitterly. Took my credit cards, racked up thousands in debt, then left me when I couldn't keep up. And the worst part, she made it look like I was the problem. The second Mark was harder to track down, but when I finally reached him, his words chilled me. If she's messing with you now, you better watch your back. Jennifer doesn't care who she destroys to get what she wants. She's ruthless. I lost my business because of her lies. Their testimonies were gold. With their permission, I recorded the conversations and added them to my growing evidence folder. Jennifer wasn't just a greedy daughter. She was a seasoned predator who had left destruction in her wake. The attorney was impressed. This could tip the scales in your favor. Judges hate patterns of exploitation. You're building a strong case. But the stronger my case became, the more desperate Jennifer grew one night around 11 p.m. I was jolted awake by loud banging on the front door. My heart nearly leapt out of my chest. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 before even looking outside. Through the peephole, I saw Jennifer. Her hair was wild, her makeup smeared, and she was screaming. "Let me in. Mom, this is my house. You can't lock me out of my own house." Her fist pounded against the door, rattling the frame. I stayed silent, my hands trembling as I clutched the phone. The operator told me officers were on their way. When the police arrived, Jennifer was still shouting in the yard. They restrained her, but she laughed in my face as they led her away. "This isn't over, Mom. You think you're smart, but you're not smarter than me." The neighbors had gathered outside by then, watching the spectacle. Mrs. Davis shook her head, whispering to another neighbor, "Lord help that poor woman," that night. As silence finally returned to my street, I realized something terrifying. Jennifer wasn't just after my house. She was out to break me mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And if I didn't strike back soon, she might succeed. So I made my decision. I wasn't just going to fight for my house anymore. I was going to destroy the carefully crafted image Jennifer had built for herself. I was going to make sure everyone saw her for the parasite she truly was. And when I finally brought her down, it wouldn't just be justice. It would be revenge. I knew I couldn't outmuscle Jennifer. She had youth charm and a dangerous boldness that made her unpredictable. But what she didn't have was patience or foresight. Those were my weapons, and I was about to use them. I began crafting my revenge plan in silence. I stopped arguing with her, stopped confronting her outright. Instead, I played the role of the weary, broken mother. When she called, I answered meekly, letting her think her intimidation was working. "Yes, Jennifer, I understand." "Of course, Jennifer, you're right." I gave her exactly what she wanted, the illusion of control. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, I sharpened every blade. The first thing I did was hire a private investigator. His name was Carl, a grizzled man in his 60s who operated out of a cramped office above a pawn shop near West 25th. When I told him my daughter had scammed me, his eyes narrowed. "You're not the first parent I've heard this from," he muttered. "Kids these days, some of them are wolves in sheep's clothing." I handed him Jennifer's photo and every scrap of information I had, her Vegas address, her lawyer friends, name the ex-husband's testimonies. "I need everything," I told him. "Where she goes, what she spends, who she talks to. Dig until your hands are dirty." He nodded. "Consider it done." While Carl went to work, I focused on my own angle. Social Jennifer had always been obsessed with appearances. She loved to flaunt her so-called success to make people believe she was thriving. So I began reaching out quietly to people in her circle, old friends, acquaintances, distant cousins. I'd call them under the pretense of catching up, but always slipped in a comment about Jennifer's behavior. "You know, she's been under a lot of stress lately. got herself into some legal trouble, or I'm worried about her, she's been making some questionable choices. Whispers spread faster than wildfire. The real blow, though, came from Carl's investigation. 2 weeks later, he handed me a manila folder, thick with photographs and receipts. Jennifer was up to her old tricks in Las Vegas gambling, away thousands at the Bellagio charging designer clothes to credit cards in other people's, names cozying up with shady men twice her age. But the golden ticket was a series of wire transfers. Carl traced money moving from Jennifer's accounts into one that belonged to her lifesaver lawyer. Not only had she scammed me, she was laundering money with him. I nearly laughed when I saw the evidence. It was like the universe had handed me a loaded gun. I gave the folder to my attorney, who nearly jumped out of his chair. "This is it," he said. "We can build a fraud case. Elder abuse conspiracy, the works. She won't just lose the house. She could lose everything. But I wasn't ready to pull the trigger just yet, no. Jennifer had humiliated me publicly, and I intended to return the favor tenfold, so I set the stage. The next time she called, I made sure my voice sounded weak broken. "Jennifer, honey, I've been thinking, maybe you're right. Maybe it's time to sell the house." She perked up instantly. I could practically hear her smile through the phone. "Finally, Mom, I knew you'd come around. Don't worry, I'll handle everything. You just sit back and relax." She took the bait. Within a week, she flew back to Cleveland. She strolled into my house in a sleek black dress heels, clicking across the hardwood, oozing confidence. She brought that same real estate agent Brian and a photographer to take official listing photos. But what she didn't know was that I had invited someone else, the attorney. When Jennifer strutted into the living room laying out her grand plans, I motioned to the man sitting quietly in the corner. "Jennifer, this is Mr. Harris, my attorney. He has some concerns about the sale." Her face froze. Just for a split second, her mask slipped, and I saw the flash of panic in her eyes. But then she recovered, smiling sweetly. "Of course. Always good to be thorough." Mr. Harris opened his briefcase and pulled out the documents Carl had uncovered. He laid them out one by one. One on the coffee table, the forged signature, the social media photo with her lawyer, the wire transfers. Jennifer's smile faltered as the color drained from her face. "Miss last name?" Mr. Harris said firmly. "You are currently under suspicion of fraud, forgery, and elder abuse. If you continue with this sale, we will have no choice but to pursue criminal charges." Silence fell heavy in the room. Brian shifted uncomfortably. The photographer lowered his camera. Jennifer's eyes darted from me to the evidence, her hands twitching at her sides. You can't prove any of this," she stammered. Mr. Harris leaned back. "We can and we will." For the first time, Jennifer looked small-cornered, but I wasn't done yet. I leaned forward, my voice low and steady. "You wanted to humiliate me, to take everything I worked for and throw me out like trash. Now the tables have turned. You can either sign this agreement returning the house to my name, or we'll see how you like answering to a judge in open court." I slid the agreement across the table. My hands were steady. Hers were not. She stared at the paper lips, trembling. For once, the daughter who had always out-talked, out-maneuvered, and out-bullied me was silent. And in that silence, I realized I had her. But she wasn't going to go down quietly. I could see it in her eyes. The storm hadn't passed. It was only gathering strength. Jennifer didn't sign that day. She picked up the agreement with shaking hands, stared at it for a long moment, then shoved it back across the table with a bitter laugh. "You think you've won, Mom. You think a few papers and some old men with briefcases scare me. I've been around bigger sharks than you'll ever know." Her words were venom, but I could hear the crack in her voice. She was bluffing. Still, she stormed out of the house, with her heels hammering the floor like gunshots, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled. Brian. The real estate agent looked at me with wide eyes before mumbling, I think I'm going to step away from this deal." He followed her out, leaving behind an awkward silence, but silence wasn't peace. The very next morning, I woke to a barrage of phone calls, credit card companies, debt collectors. Somehow Jennifer had managed to open new accounts in my name overnight. Thousands of dollars charged to stores I'd never set foot in. She wasn't just retaliating. She was escalating. I drove straight to my attorney's office, heart-hammering evidence folder clutched tight to my chest. "She's trying to destroy me," I said, my voice shaking. Mr. Harris nodded grimly. "Then it's time we take this to court." We filed for an emergency injunction to stop any sale of the house. We also reported the new identity theft to the police. The process moved slowly, but for the first time I felt the law leaning in my direction. Jennifer, however, doubled down. She showed up at the house again, this time not with an agent or a photographer, but with her so-called lifesaver lawyer, the same slick man from Vegas dressed in a suit that probably cost more than my monthly pension. They stood in my living room, like wolves sizing up prey. "Mrs. Last Name," the lawyer began smoothly, "you've created quite a mess, but there's still a way to resolve this quietly." Jennifer crossed her arms, smirking. "Sign the house over again, Sham. For real this time, no games. And well, forget about all the little debts you suddenly have." I stared at her, my daughter who I had carried in my arms, fed with my own hands, comforted through nightmares. Now she was extorting me like a common criminal. I drew in a slow breath and then laughed, a deep, bitter laugh that made them both falter. "Jennifer," I said, "you've already lost. You just don't know it yet." And right then, Carl stepped out of the hallway. I had called him earlier, asked him to be here when Jennifer arrived. He carried a small device in his Honda recorder, got every word Carl said with a grim smile. Jennifer's smirk vanished. The lawyer's face drained of color. "You recorded that," Jennifer hissed. "Fraud, extortion, harassment." Carl listed calmly. "You just confessed to all of it." The lawyer muttered something under his breath and tugged at Jennifer's arm. "We're leaving?" He snapped. But as they stormed out, Jennifer spun back to me, her face twisted with rage. "You'll regret this, Mom. I swear to God, you'll regret this." Her words echoed long after the door slammed shut, and then came the trial. It was months later in the Cleveland Municipal Court, a gray stone building that seemed to hum with the weight of other people's tragedies. The courtroom smelled faintly of polish and nerves. Jennifer arrived in a bright red dress chin held high, her lawyer beside her. She looked like she thought she was walking into a fashion show instead of a fraud case. She didn't even glance at me as we sat on opposite sides of the room. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes, wasted no time. Mr. Harris presented the evidence, the forged signature, the handwriting analysis, the testimonies from her ex-husbands, Carl's photos, the wire transfers, the break-in police report, and finally the recording of Jennifer and her lawyer trying to pressure me into signing. When Jennifer heard her own voice echo through the courtroom speakers, her mask finally cracked. She shifted in her seat, fidgeted with her hair, glanced nervously at the jury. Her lawyer tried to object, but the judge silenced him with a single look. Then it was Jennifer's turn to speak. She stood, her voice trembling as she painted herself as the victim. "I was only trying to help my mother. She's confused. She doesn't understand paperwork. She's been manipulated by outsiders who want to tear our family apart. Her crocodile tears might have swayed strangers once, but not now. Not with the mountain of evidence against her." When the judge finally spoke, her voice was like steel. "Ms. Last Name, this is a clear case of fraud, elder abuse, and exploitation. The deed is hereby returned to its rightful owner. Furthermore, this court recommends the district attorney pursue criminal charges." I sat frozen for a moment, the words washing over me like warm sunlight after a storm. Then, for the first time in years, I breathed deeply. The house was mine again. Jennifer's face turned crimson. She slammed her hands on the table and hissed across the courtroom, "This isn't over, Mom. You'll pay for this." But her threats sounded hollow now, empty, because everyone in that room had seen her for what she truly was. Still, as I left the courthouse and stepped into the crisp Cleveland air, I knew the war wasn't quite over. Jennifer had lost her power, her scheme, her illusion of control. but desperate people don't go down quietly. And I had the chilling feeling that my daughter's downfall was only just beginning. The court's decision should have been the end. For most people it would have been, but Jennifer wasn't most people. She wasn't built to admit defeat. The weeks after the trial were strangely quiet, almost too quiet. I half expected her to storm back into my life, kicking down my door in another fit of rage. Instead, she vanished. No calls, no texts, no late-night threats. It was unnerving, like waiting for a storm that never came. But storms always arrive. One morning I was sipping coffee on the porch when Mrs. Davis shuffled across the street with her little dog in tow. "Did you see the news?" she asked, her eyes wide. I shook my head. She handed me her phone. On the screen was a headline from the Las Vegas Review, Journal local woman and attorney partner charged in massive fraud scheme. And there beneath the bold black letters was a photo of Jennifer in handcuffs, her smug lawyer beside her. I nearly dropped the phone. The article explained everything. After our case unraveled, her Little Empire investigators had dug deeper into her finances. They uncovered multiple scams, phony investments, fake loans, laundering money through shell companies. She had fleeced not just me, but dozens of other people, some of them elderly, some vulnerable, all left in ruin. The charges stacked up like bricks: wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, the kind of charges that don't just sting, they bury. I read every word twice, my hands trembling. Later that week, I got a call from Carl, my investigator. His voice was heavy, but satisfied. She overplayed her hand. Once the feds got wind of the wire transfers, we found it was only a matter of time. She's looking at 20 years minimum. 20 years, my daughter, my flesh and blood, would be 55 years old before she even had a chance at freedom again. When I hung up the phone, I sat in silence, staring out the window at the roses blooming in my yard, the same yard she had once tried to sell out from under me. And I felt complicated relief. Yes, justice, absolutely, but also grief, because revenge had never been my goal. Not at first. All I ever wanted was my daughter's love, her respect, her honesty. And instead I had to destroy her to protect myself. I thought about all the nights I'd worked double shifts to buy her those dance shoes, all the meals I'd skipped so she could have better lunches at school. Every sacrifice seemed like a cruel joke. Now, the day her sentencing was announced, I sat in the back of the courtroom in Las Vegas. Jennifer stood before the judge, older now, her once perfect hair limp, her confidence shattered. The red dress was gone. She wore an orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on her frame. The judge's voice rang out, "Jennifer, last name. You are hereby sentenced to 22 years in federal prison." Jennifer turned her head just slightly, and for a brief second our eyes met. There was no apology in her gaze, no remorse, only hatred, pure burning hatred. And that was when I knew I hadn't just lost a daughter. I had lost her long before the courtroom, long before the scam. The little girl I once carried on my hip was gone, replaced by a woman I no longer recognized. When the guards led her away, chains clinking softly, the room emptied, I stayed behind, gripping the wooden bench until my knuckles turned white. I finally walked outside into the bright Nevada sun and whispered to myself, "She thought she could take everything from me. Instead, she lost everything herself." I returned to Cleveland, back to the little house on East 128th Street, back to the life I had nearly lost. The roses bloomed brighter that summer, or maybe it was just me seeing them with new eyes. The house was still mine, my sanctuary, but the silence inside was different now. Heavier. Some nights I'd sit in the living room and stare at the dining table where it all began. The papers, the lies, the betrayal. I would think about how one signature nearly ended my life, and how in the end it ended hers instead. Because Jennifer had gambled not just with my home, but with her entire future. And at 55, she found out the house always wins. I still live here today, alone, but unbroken. People ask if I ever visit her in prison. I can't. She chose her path, and I chose mine. And when I close my eyes at night, I remember her words the day she stole my house. Safe with me. The irony haunts me, because in the end, the only thing safe was the house itself. Safe from her safe with me, safe forever, and will carry that chilling truth to my grave. The end.